Since their introduction in Halo CE, the Flood have always been one of the most mysterious and arguably most interesting aspects of Halo. Though easily misunderstood as simply space zombies, they are much, much more. Following Halo CE, each game they were present in would continue to flesh out the Flood, Halo 2 introducing the terrible intelligence that directed the Flood, the Gravemind, Halo 3 introducing pure forms and further developing what the Flood was capable of, and Halo Wars showing what a large-scale Flood outbreak was truly like, not to mention the vast expansion of Flood lore in the books and other media. When Halo Wars 2 decided to include the Flood, it was inevitable that we would learn more about the parasite, especially given what had already been generally presented about the universe via the Phoenix logs. Still, I don't think anyone was quite ready for how far 343 would go when Awakening the Nightmare released. Beyond just ensuring that more casual fans wouldn't be completely left in the dark, 343 answered some big questions about the Flood, at least big questions I had, and introduced some new, if not somewhat controversial, lore. We'll get to the keymines, but I want to start with another piece of lore that I found interesting. Since the days of Halo 3, though I think this popped up more around the release of the Forerunner saga, people have been questioning how the Gravemind in Halo 2 and 3 seem to remember the events of the Forerunner Flood War.
Consume the galaxy of flesh, mind, and bone.
There have been theories over the years, such as the Gravemind having survived in some form from the Forerunner Flood War, or the Flood supercell acting as some sort of data storage that the Gravemind can access once it's fully formed, to even the Flood's knowledge and memory existing in some non-corporeal manner akin to the Domain. Well, the Phoenix logs do somewhat confirm that final theory. From the log titled An Uncomfortable Truth Part 2, once a Gravemind has been created, the Flood's race memory is reestablished and it becomes almost unstoppable. So it would seem that once a Gravemind is formed, it gains access to all the knowledge that the Flood has amassed. The question still remains how this knowledge is accessed though, or if it's stored somehow, perhaps in something like the Domain, but I like having this small bit of confirmation at the very least. One can imagine that if we ever encountered a fully realized Flood outbreak again, the Gravemind would likely remember the Chief. But moving on, a lot of the other interesting bits of information are all tied to a new/old form that appeared in these logs, keymines. Originally introduced in Halo Silentium, they were described as such. The Flood is mutating to form Graveminds of unprecedented size and complexity, incorporating many species. Entire planetary ecosystems have apparently undergone conversion to what are being referred to as keymines. Or, in other words, according to the book, keymines were planetary-sized Graveminds that further spread the influence of the Flood. In Halo Wars 2, however, we see what one could call an expansion of this term. Keymind, as presented in Halo Wars 2, is a blanket term to describe a number of Flood forms that house the Flood's intelligence and coordinate lesser forms in some manner, including and up to the Gravemind and classic keyminds of the Forerunner saga. When a Flood outbreak begins, known as the feral stage, the Flood coordinate via pheromones, not unlike some insect species that exhibit what we commonly, though erroneously, refer to as hive mind intelligence, and are driven by an instinctual need to gather calcium and biomass to eventually construct a Gravemind. As the Flood infestation grows and they gather more biomass, this is when we start seeing the earliest emergences of what are called keymines. These minds begin the transition from feral to coordinated as they bring order and direction to the Flood forms in their vicinity. In the case of the Abomination form specifically, the Phoenix logs note that this is a form that emerges when hides cannot be easily established and the Flood has to remain mobile. In-universe, this does kind of explain why they can suddenly appear in Halo Wars 2 but never appeared in previous games or even other media. In Halo 2 and 3, a Gravemind had already been established, so keymines, at least what we see in Halo Wars 2, wouldn't really be necessary, or there wasn't sufficient time or biomass to establish them. And of course in Halo CE, the Flood outbreak was just way too small, too new, to have formed keymines. And the Proto-Gravemind that we saw formed was fairly small compared to any others we've seen in Halo media. But moving on, Abominations aren't the only form of keymind. While we now know this includes proto and full Graveminds, one can imagine that there are other forms early keyminds can take. In Halo Wars 1 specifically, we encounter numerous blobs of raw biomass labeled Flood colonies. Particularly in the 9th level, appropriately called the Flood, when these colonies are destroyed, the proto-Gravemind form present is also hurt. In Halo Wars 2, we see a type of Flood unit known as a Spore Mound. These are visually similar and act similar to the colonies of Halo Wars 1, and also enhance nearby Flood just like abominations. Given these facts, I can't help but wonder if these colonies from Halo Wars 1 and the Spore Mounds of Halo Wars 2 are a type of Keymind. Anyway, as the Flood infestation continues to build, Keymines begin to come together to form a proto-Gravemind which sifts through the Flood's memories and further directs their efforts with the help of other Keymines as we see in Halo Wars 2. Eventually, of course, a Gravemind is formed, new forms emerge, and large Keymines form, eventually resulting in the planetary scale mines we remember from the Forerunner saga. Perhaps most interesting of all, though, is that the redefinition of Keymines seems to, at least in part, address a long-standing question among the community concerning a Gravemind's area of influence. Basically, if you had two Flood outbreaks occur and both end up forming a Gravemind, how far does that Gravemind's area of influence spread? How close would these two outbreaks need to be before the area of influence overlaps? While no definitive answer is present, and I don't think it ever will be, Keymines, I think, do help give an idea of how far a Gravemind's influence spreads. One just has to question now what would happen if two Flood outbreaks that had formed Graveminds met. In Halo Primordium, the main human characters encounter a number of dormant Graveminds across the surface of a Halo ring. So if two Graveminds met, would they combine? Would one become a Keymind for the other, or would one go dormant? It's an interesting, if off-topic, question. Now I'll be honest, when this retcon first came to light, I, like many others, was not a fan. Why retcon this form? Why not call these smaller minds Hive Minds or something, or some other name? However, as time has passed and I've been able to sit on this information, I can see and even support what 343 did. When you have a number of forms that serve similar or identical purposes, why not just give them a blanket name? But what do you think of this retcon, and what do you think of all this new lore for the Flood in the Phoenix logs? As you know, I love to hear from you in the comments below. Thanks for watching as always, and until next time, this has been Halo Canon. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing, and if you really love me, hit that notification bell and leave a thumbs up. These both really help out the channel. I wouldn't be where I am now without your views and support, so once again, thank you. Keep on being awesome, Canonites.